And thanks for joining us as we kick off another new week of all things people, power, and politics. This, my friends, is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. We have another loaded show for you and no time to waste. The federal takeover of D.C.'s police department and its fallout once again taking center stage this week. And as the president threatens to put troops in a major Midwest city, we're getting perspective from a former U.S. attorney. His thoughts on the president testing the limits of power, plus former Detroit Police Chief James Craig and Gina Keller with Femmes for Dems weigh in. Plus, Oakland County's prosecutor wants to be our state's top prosecutor. Karen McDonald is in Studio C with why she's running and her message for you. We'll get to all of that in just a second here. But first, we want to run through some of the big stories we're following right now tonight. The House Oversight Committee subpoenas Jeffrey Epstein's estate as they try to figure out who was connected to the sex offender. They're demanding a book with notes for his 50th birthday, his will, agreements he signed with prosecutors, address books, and financial transactions. The DOJ already started handing over documents in the case last week, but Democrats on the committee say some 33,000 pages they've gotten so far, for the most part, are already public. The man wrongfully deported to El Salvador earlier this year is detained by ICE once again. You remember this man? Kilmar Abrego Garcia was arrested in Baltimore today. He's out of jail awaiting trial on human smuggling charges. His lawyers sued to fight his deportation until a court hears his claim for protection. The Trump administration admitted Abrego Garcia's deportation earlier this year was a mistake, but claims he's a gang member. His attorneys say there's no evidence of that. And President Trump signing a pair of executive orders in the Oval Office today to kick off the work week. He wants to prosecute people who burn the American flag despite the Supreme Court saying it's protected by the First Amendment. The exception to that is if it's likely to start a riot. The president wants people to spend a year in jail for burning the flag. The other executive order would withhold federal money to state and local governments that offer cashless bail. Supporters of cashless bail say it's a penalty on poverty. But President Trump says it's all about fighting crime, speaking out about the orders in the Oval Office today.
All over the country, they're burning flags. All over the world, they burn the American flag. And as you know, through a very sad court, I guess it was a 5-4 decision, they called it freedom of speech. But there's another reason, which is perhaps much more important. It's called death. Because what happens when you burn a flag is the area goes crazy. When somebody kills somebody, they go in, don't worry about it, no cash, come back in a couple of months, we'll give you a trial. You never see the person again. And I mean, they kill people and they get out. Cashless bail. They thought it was discriminatory to make people put up money.
Joining us now to talk more about the bail issue and other big issues that, of course, are at the talk of the town, both in D.C. and here in Detroit, including the federal takeover in Washington, former U.S. Attorney Matthew Schneider. And it's good to see you, Matthew. Always a pleasure.
Likewise, Roop. Thank you.
Let's talk for a moment about this cashless bail issue. It's interesting because oftentimes with this administration, everything feels new, although we've seen this movie in some states before. I know they have cashless bail or nearly cashless bail, I believe in Illinois, New Mexico, and New Jersey. How does it work? And do you believe that this is a penalty on poverty?
Well, you're right. We even have it here in some places in Michigan, like in Washington County. And the issue is when a person gets arrested, usually for a dangerous crime, how do you assure that they are going to appear again in court? And in the olden days, or in a lot of places still, you give them a bond. They have to pay a certain amount of money, put up a bond to assure their appearance into the courtroom again. Some jurisdictions have said that that's discriminatory. It really affects poor people because if you're rich, you can pay the bond, and if you're poor, you can't. So therefore, people languish in jails. And what President Trump is saying, the system, the way that it's working, it's not working, because if you don't have to post that kind of bond, you're just out on the street again, and you're committing more crimes, and he wants to put an end to that.
Matthew, though, the question that, of course, deserves to be asked at this moment is, wait a minute here, judges, for the most part, don't give bond for extremely serious crimes like murder, for instance.
Oh, that's true, but not always, right? We have to be thinking about where this will play out in other parts of the country. That's what the president's doing, is looking at all 50 states. And he's saying even in those cases that are not murder, but they're less than that, they're assaultive, they're still violent, people are still getting released. And he's saying that we can't have that again because that is what is making our streets unsafe.
I want to ask you about John Bolton, the former national security advisor, obviously at odds with what just happened, an investigation into what he may have done with classified documents. The allegation is that he essentially used I believe, a private server and sent classified documents to his family from the White House. If you're a Democrat and you're watching this and you see a Republican do that, you're waving your head. If you're a Republican, you see a Democrat do that, you're waving your head. This is wrong any way you cut it if the allegation is true. How serious is it?
It's extremely serious, and this is not the first time this type of thing has happened before. Remember David Petraeus, who was the former head of the CIA and a general. He did virtually the same type of thing that's alleged here. He took confidential, classified information, he gave it to his book publisher, and he was convicted of that and received a federal sentence. So if that is what is going on with Bolton, and if that plays out that way, I wouldn't expect a whole lot of lenience from the Justice Department.
What about when you look at, it's almost as though you have to look at who didn't share classified documents. Vice President Biden at the time, when he was a senator, apparently had stuff in his garage from his Senate days. And then when he was a vice president, President Trump, 37 counts. Yes, they were dropped, but nonetheless, there were documents just in Mar-a-Lago just sitting there. How serious of an issue is this, no matter how you cut it and who does it?
Well, there's a big difference between possessing classified documents after you've left office, and Biden and Trump did that, and then using those documents to share and to profit off of it. And if you're using classified materials so that you can sell a book and earn money, that's a whole different ball of wax, and the Justice Department lawyers will look at it that way.
I want to talk to you in the remaining time we have together about this crime crackdown that the president is doing. We all know that what he's doing in D.C. is under his jurisdiction, and it's something he's able to do. Now we're waiting to see if Congress will extend that time in Washington. But when he says he's going to do this in, let's say, Illinois, and you have the governor there say, I'll see you in court, man. What gives? And is there a path forward for this president to try to do this?
There is really no doubt at all that any president can use his authority or her authority to enforce the National Guard and call them out and nationalize them. That's not the issue. It's not whether the president can do it, it's how it's done. And you have to follow very specific laws. You can either do as was done in California under the president's Title X authority, where he used the National Guard to put down what he referred to as a rebellion of people beating up and attacking ICE agents and federal officials and trashing buildings. Or you can also use a different section of the law, which allows you to call up the National Guard, but those National Guard troops really stay under the governor's command. So for the most part, if the president decides to use that section of the law, I think we're going to see that in most of the states, the governors of those states will probably be Republicans, and there will probably be governors who are willing to go along with that.
But in Illinois, for instance, the governor there is saying no way. And how does the president justify? I understand protecting ICE agents from violence. That's one thing. But if there's simply crime that's happening on the streets of Chicago, how does he then make the same argument that that's a reason for the National Guard to be there?
Yeah, it's going to be a fight. I mean, and this is going to be a close call of litigation. The president will have to be saying that these troops are really not in the same type of role. They're really in support role. For example, when somebody who's present unlawfully in the country needs to be fingerprinted, they might do the fingerprinting, or they might do the DNA swab, or they may process the paperwork. And that'll at least give the president some ammunition to say, sure, this is not like what happened in California. It's much different, and it's much more administrative.
Former U.S. Attorney Matthew Schneider, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thanks for joining us here on The Pulse. We appreciate your perspective.
Thank you.
We're keeping this conversation going after the break. Former Detroit Police Chief James Craig and Gina Keller with Femmes for Dems weighing in. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. Here with their thoughts on the federal takeover of D.C.'s police department and President Trump testing his powers. Gina Keller, a political commentator and co-founder of Distill Social, and former Detroit Police Chief James Craig. We thank you both for joining us here on The Pulse. It's good to see you.
Great, Rube. Glad to be here.
You know, Chief, as soon as you and I talked and you were coming on the show, I thought, the number one question that I have for you, I'm so curious. If this was a Democratic president and you were a police chief in the city of Detroit, and they suddenly said, we don't like the way you're handling crime. We're going to send in National Guard to help, with or without your blessing. What would you say?
You know, that's a great question, because what never gets talked about, this has already happened by a Democrat president. Let's go back to 1994. I'm talking about it under President Clinton. I'm talking about the Violent Crime and Law Enforcement Act, commonly known as consent decrees. And I worked in 3 departments from Los Angeles, Cincinnati, and Detroit that were all under federal oversight. So what's the difference?
But federal oversight is different than the National Guard's presence and what it does to a community, wouldn't you say?
No, I disagree. I said, I look at what Trump did and I agree. I'm gonna tell you why I agree. When you got feckless leadership at the office of the mayor, possibly police chief as well, something must be done. You know, D.C. is a unique situation. So, you know, the president has an obligation to keep federal government property safe, statues, and government employees. He has an obligation to do that. So, and I know what your last guest talked about, you know, the whole idea of what happened in L.A. Once again, feckless leadership out of the mayor's office. So what does he do? He federalizes the National Guard because the governor did nothing, the mayor did nothing, and the police chief admitted that they were overwhelmed.
And
his quote, not
Gina,
mine.
so let's talk for a moment about, this is a complicated issue with many layers, and it can't be simplified all in a quick minute here, but I do want to ask you, when you have ICE agents being attacked, the president said, we need to protect federal agents, and so therefore I'm going to send the help in. But in Chicago, for instance, the president is saying, hey, maybe I'll send the troops to Chicago. What changes for you right there?
It's an occupation. As somebody who was recently in Chicago with my children, I can tell you it is absolutely a city that nobody should feel unsafe walking around, you know, during the day in neighborhoods where people go out to restaurants and shop and walk along the lakefront there. It's kind of insane what's happening. You know, you brought up LA. We sent in 2,000 National Guard for 60 days, and it cost the taxpayers $160 million. How much are these occupations costing us? Crime is at an all-time low in this country. In D.C., 30-year low. This year is slated to be lower than the last year.
Do you fear, Gina, that the numbers, because this is important, obviously, if we're going to base all of our, you know, our passions on so many of these numbers, that perhaps these departments aren't being fully honest, or they're categorizing crime in a way that conveniently poses it in a different light? No,
this is clearly partisan. Okay, we have National Guard troops from red states being deployed to blue states. My office is down in Detroit. I'm there every day. I can tell you Detroit is a wonderful city to come and have dinner in one night, or go shopping in during the day, or take your children to walk around, you know, on the riverfront.
Do you credit Police Chief James Craig for the work he did in the time he was there for
Please
helping
say yes. Please say yes.
Look, I can tell you that the people of Detroit, it's not like folks don't want police. They absolutely do want police. Crime happens. It does. Violent crime is way down across the country in every state. And I believe that what we are now doing is adding to this insane deficit where we're spending hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars to deploy these troops on American soil. Their guns are out, pointed at citizens, at people in America. It's insane.
And Gina, that's it, and that is one take. And another take that some people have also is that, look, we have a Second Amendment, and the Second Amendment clearly, as you know, Chief, states that, look, you got to have a check against federal powers. And what I find peculiar and striking is the fact that so many conservatives have talked about the power of militias within the state to make sure the feds don't take over. But in this case, I find that those voices are silent. Is that interesting to you?
Well, what's interesting to me is nobody, you know, and out of respect to my guest here, when she talked about Chicago being unsafe because of the potential of National Guard, the city is unsafe. The feckless mayor there has done very little to move the needle. Now, we wave this data around, these crime stats, and say, guess what, everybody? The lowest crime in 30 years. But that shouldn't be the only gauge. What I know, 44 years in policing, it's not just about crime data. It's about the perception of crime. People in D.C. didn't feel safe. And so when we say it's okay, people, and oh, by the way, I must add this. So let's go back to 2020. We talk about what the taxpayers are paying for National Guard to assist and coordinate with local law enforcement to create safe cities. But what we don't ever talk about is what happened in 2020 when all these cities were on fire, there was looting, there was rioting.
Now,
and what
one
did it
pane
cost?
of glass, in Detroit was broken.
In Detroit, didn't happen.
Chief,
and there's a reason for
we
that.
only have about 40 seconds left. I do have to ask you again, if you would please address this issue. So many conservatives for so many years, for decades, have talked about the state's right to have a militia to check federal powers. Where are those voices now as this president talks about federalizing?
Well,
the Michigan militia, the militias across, the people who say we have a right to bear arms and also to protect against federal checks.
Well, I support law-abiding citizens, armed, law-abiding, responsible citizens being armed. How that happens, the responsibility, but we're talking about two separate things. We're talking about creating safety. We're talking about deploying National Guard to do what? To coordinate, not just take over.
The fact is, cities are safe. Michiganders go to Chicago frequently. We walk around, we spend long weekends there, we take our children to the museums there. We know Chicago's safe, and that's not a narrative you can pass on us.
I got to add one more thing.
That being said, that being said, we are literally arming the streets, and that is not a de-escalation, and that's what the people want to see.
Let me say this. Let's talk about my fictional character called Mrs. Smith, who lives on the east side of Detroit.
We got 15 seconds for Mrs. Smith.
Who is faced with violence. She doesn't live in that neighborhood, but Miss Smith does. Miss Smith wants to be safe. And when you don't live in a neighborhood, or you haven't done what I've done for 44 years, where you're on the street with the community, I understand it. Nobody talks about the real victims, the law-abiding citizens that rely on
there is a
police.
There is a line between the national monuments in D.C. and those streets that are not traveled by tourists. There is a difference between downtown Detroit and the neighborhoods, and of course, the beautiful Michigan Mile in Chicago and the neighborhoods, and everyone is recognizing that.
Let's talk to those people in the community.
We will continue this conversation with the people in the community and also the two of you. We thank you, Chief James Craig. Thank you, Gina Keller, for joining us. An important conversation, and Ernest, it begins here and continues perhaps at your dinner table. Up next, Karen McDonald is in Studio C about her run for Attorney General. Her message for you. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. It is People, Power, and Politics. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show. Here to talk about her run for Michigan Attorney General, Oakland County Prosecutor Karen McDonald. We're giving an opportunity to all candidates running for office to come on Detroit's only nightly political talk show. And we thank Karen for joining us here on The Pulse.
You're welcome.
It's good to see you. I want to begin by talking about where you've been to know where you're headed, right? You want this top prosecutor job in the state. You currently, as the prosecutor, have done a lot when it comes to gun violence. I want you to unpack for us this crime coalition that you put together. Where are we with that right now? Of course, this after Oxford.
Yeah, gun violence is the #1 cause of death for kids in this country. And if you think about that and what we did in 2019, until 2019, it was automobile accidents. And we have done so much to teach people and kids about how to keep themselves safe in a car. We teach them from the moment they're young. We teach them in schools. We regulate. We've done so many things. You can't leave the hospital with a baby without showing you have a safe car seat. And yet now it's firearm. It's gun violence, and we've done almost nothing except argue a lot over guns.
So we know that the fighting has happened, and in the meantime, you keep in touch with all of the Oxford parents who dealt with this unimaginable loss that they're all still reeling from.
I do.
When you look at what conversations are happening with those parents about what needs to be done, what are the moms and dads telling you who are truly affected by this more than anybody else?
So much pain, so much anger. But I want to say that it's not just the parents of the children or the kids that died in that school. It doesn't matter where I go, even anywhere in the country. I have people who will recognize me from seeing me and in the trial and approach me, and very emotional moms, dads saying, what can I do? Should I buy my kid a bulletproof backpack? I mean, that's where we are right now in this country. Should I buy my kid a bulletproof backpack?
That shouldn't be a back-to-school shopping list, wish list.
It should not. But it's this It's this helplessness and this fear. And, you know, once you're in a position where you feel like you have the ability to do something about it, this is just what I do every single day, and I will continue to do it. And I think the fact that we're not talking about gun violence, you know, I'm on the campaign trail, I'm still doing my job, and on nights and weekends I'm going all over the state and I'm talking to people, and I listen to so many candidates, my opponents and other elected officials, and no one's talking about gun violence prevention yet. It's the #1 cause of death for kids in this country. And look, there's a lot going on, so there's a lot of things to talk about.
Is it the uphill battle that the unspoken uphill battle that everyone talks about when it comes to the balancing act of protecting gun rights, but at the same time understanding what is safe and not safe in our society?
No, actually, you know, right before I announced the charges against the parents, which I felt strongly was the right thing to do, I really felt and said, yep, I'm probably going to be a one-term prosecutor. I still did that. And to my surprise, the overwhelming amount of people were in support of it. But the largest group that I hear from in a positive way are responsible gun owners. So this isn't really the tension between people worrying somebody's going to take their guns away. It's more about common sense and, you know, having the courage to do the right thing at the right time. And I think that's what people are hungry for, right? People are tired of listening to politicians argue. They are starved, just like I am, for someone who will have courage but be transparent and do the right thing, not out of revenge, not because of a party, but because we need to protect kids.
When you talk about guardrails, and the heavy lift here is, of course, the topic of guns, but just for a moment, we don't put it aside, but we focus on something else. How do you deal with a president that you don't see eye to eye on with the way he sees and honors his own executive powers, and how you as an attorney general could try to do something? Do you think attorneys general across the country are doing it the right way?
The attorneys general across the country are absolutely the only elected official in this country right now who have immediate tools to react to what is blatantly a violation of the law. Look, this is not to me about whether I agree or whether I don't agree. I'm a lawyer. My job is the top law enforcement official in the second largest county, and I'm running to be the top law enforcement official in the state. I have to enforce the law and follow the rules.
What would you file against today, the things that you're seeing at the federal level as an attorney general?
I do not understand how we somehow are in a place now where the President of the United States is trying to tell local authorities, mayors and governors, what they should do and impose his opinion and actions and will on a state or a local government, not out of principle, out of partisanship. And I think I think it's wrong, and it doesn't matter who's doing it. It's wrong, and as the next Attorney General, I'm absolutely going to stand up for the people of the state of Michigan.
We have about 20 seconds left. What is the other topic that you would literally want to touch on as the Attorney General? Tackle?
There's a lot of things in this state that are regulated. Everything, every business, to protect our Great Lakes and to protect the rights of everybody in the state, and the Attorney General is responsible for that. And I'm a prosecutor, but I'm also a former judge and a former teacher, and I'm a mom. And these things are very important to me, just like everybody else in this state is.
And those are topics you'll be talking about. Karen, we're out of time, but I want to thank you so much for joining us here on The Pulse.
Thank you.
Thank you. Karen McDonald, running for Attorney General. That is The Pulse for tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Rup Raj. As always, it was great to be with you.